If you can handle the truth, then strap yourself in for the White Knuckle Podcast, where we take whitetail bow hunting and dissect it from every angle. Whether you're looking for tips, tactics, or gear reviews, when it comes to the world of whitetail bow hunting, we've got it all. And now, from the White Knuckle Production Studios, your white-knuckled hosts, Todd Pringnetz and Jason Science. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jack, for the nice introduction. Welcome, everyone, back to the White Knuckle Podcast, episode number 8. Today we have with us Bronson Strickland. Bronson is an associate professor with Mississippi State University. Bronson is the co-director of Mississippi State University's Deer Lab. I am minus my sidekick, Todd, today. He called in sick, but my guess is he's probably scouring the woods looking for shed antlers. Whatever the case, it was a ton of fun to talk to Bronson, and I got to sort of abuse the privilege of having him all to myself. So we didn't get real deep into any one subject. What we did do is I got to ask him a lot of questions about my deer season and what happened to me and why what happened may have happened and what I could have done differently. And what I learned, I guess, was a little bit surprising. That said, I walked out of that conversation feeling like I had maximized every opportunity that I had, and also learned that there may not have been a whole lot that I could do to have had the season turn out differently. So listen into what I hope you find is a very interesting conversation with a guy who basically studies deer for a living. Today I have with me on the other line Bronson Strickland, an associate professor with the Mississippi State University. I believe, Bronson, you said that you are one of the co-directors of the Deer Lab. Is that correct?
That's correct, Jason. Co-director of the MSU Deer Lab.
Thanks for coming on the show, first of all. I got an opportunity to hear you last week on a different podcast and was happy that I got a chance to listen to it prior to talking to you, because you certainly had a lot of neat things to say. First, if you could, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how it is that you got into this, because I'm guessing, and I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing some of this is a labor of love. Certainly, it's a job, I'm sure. But how did you get into the position that you're in of essentially studying deer? That's because that's what you do, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what I do, and I've always considered myself one of the luckiest guys alive. Is that I get to get paid for doing my passion. And yeah, my pathway to wildlife biology, that's kind of the career category, wildlife biology and management, was because I hunted. And so when I was in junior high and just becoming, enamored and spending every minute of every day thinking about squirrel hunting or deer hunting or something like that, I learned that there was this profession called wildlife biology and being a wildlife biologist. And when I learned that, I never looked back. That was my career choice starting in 8th grade. And made it through high school, and then went to get my undergraduate degree in wildlife biology at the University of Georgia. And after that, I went to South Texas, Texas A&M University at Kingsville, and was lucky enough there to work on a project on a big 60,000-acre South Texas ranch where deer management was the priority, and got to see, at that time too, so this was the mid-'90s, and when you're riding down a bigger ranch like that where literally half of your age structure is mature bucks and bucks are dying of old age, a colleague of mine told me, he said, you're going to be, the first month you're there, you're going to be so wowed by seeing all the 120 and 130 and 140 class bucks. You're going to have your camera and taking pictures. And after about a month, you won't even slow the truck down. There'll be so many of these older age bucks. It's just commonplace. And right. Then you start slowing the truck down when it's a 150 or a 160 or 170. And that's not, I'm not just saluting only bucks there and bucks with big antlers, but that's just the type of special place, South Texas can be with that large properties and older age structures. That's what happens. And then after that, graduated from A&M Kingsville and then took a job at Mississippi State with Steve Damaris, who is the other co-director of the MSU Deer Lab, and we work on really applied management research questions. And my job was working with our state wildlife agency, the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks, and working with them on analyzing their hunter data set. They have a program called the Deer Management Assistance Program where hunters collect harvest data. And those harvest data are collected and given to a state biologist, and several years of those data had amassed, and my job was to look at those data and pick it apart and try to look for different trends over time and in the different regions of Mississippi. And that was how I got my PhD. That was my PhD project. And then a few years after that, there was a faculty position here open, and I gladly applied for it and got it and accepted, and I've been here in this position since 2006. So that's my story.
So now you're living the dream, so to speak.
I really am.
Nice.
I really am. I'm living the dream. I love it.
That's awesome. So you study deer for a living is really what it boils down to, the way it sounds to me. And you like to hunt, so that's sort of a bonus, right?
Yeah, that's a big bonus. Because a lot of the questions everybody, hunters have in mind, I have those questions in mind too. And, that to me, that's what's fulfilling about it as well, is you're not just working in the lab, is that, when I go hunt, I'm also thinking, when I see deer, or see bucks, or see fawns, I'm sitting there thinking of the biological side and what's happening and what are the research gaps and questions we need to figure out, to manage the resource better.
You just mentioned sitting there thinking, and I don't think that there's any person that's listening to this that's remotely interested in anything that we have to say that hasn't sat in a stand and thought and second guessed and third guessed. I mean, I take a week or 2 weeks when my filming partner Dave and I go out, and I swear to you, it's 6 o'clock in the morning and it's just breaking light, and I'm already looking at my cell phone going, what's the wind like tomorrow? Because today isn't feeling real good, and I'm already second guessing my plan. How much of what you do, because of the knowledge you have, how much of what you do as a hunter is how much of it really carries over into your hunting? How much of all the research that you've done do you apply when you're hunting?
This is probably a boring answer, but I think I apply most of it. And I second guess myself just like you, so I'm thinking, all right, what's the time of year? Where's the major food? Are we talking about, are they food plots and cereal grains right now, or are we, what are the acorns doing? What's the mass crop like? Where's most likely my cover? Where's most likely a feeding area? Where's a corridor that's going to connect the two? And then I'm thinking about the wind. Which way is it coming? Strategically, where should I set up? But the bottom line is you do all that just like you do, Jason. But you got to put in the hours.
Right.
Deer are individuals, and some days you think you have it figured out. There's no way you can lose, and you don't see a deer. And there's no biological reason why other than just random chance, They were a few minutes late or a few minutes early or something like that, and you miss an opportunity. When it comes to things like the rut, I try to use biological knowledge with that on sitting it out all day. I mean, that's a lot of people can't do it. I love it. If I can take an entire day off, I like to strategically find a place, again, where I think is a mixture between bedding and food and hopefully a corridor where a buck's going to be cruising through and maybe, checking for does that are in heat and just sit all day, because you never know during the rut. It may be a buck that you know about in your area, and he may be cruising through at 11 o'clock, or it may be a buck from 3 properties away, or 5 miles away, and he's cruising through checking it out. So mainly that, it's stuff like that. The times I rattle, I try to pick strategic times and areas where I would rattle and hopefully get a response. So it's always, Jason, running through my mind, but it's running through your mind as well.
I guess that's a little bit reassuring, and that's, I guess, in the back of my mind. Prior to us having this conversation, I kind of wondered to myself, and I wondered the same thing when I talked to Dr. Grant Woods, do these folks go out and sit in a tree stand and, just automatically have success because they possess all this knowledge. And I think the common thread that I'm hearing is that, there's still an element of chance, or still I guess I don't know exactly how you'd say it, but it's still, it's not an exact calculated sport, or excuse me, it's not an exact calculated move that's a guarantee, I guess.
You only control one side of the equation. You be in there, you put in all the homework and pick your spot, and the deer control the other side of the equation. The other part too, Jason, for me is it's therapy.
Yeah.
I mean, even if I'm skunked that day, it was wonderful to spend 3 hours in a tree stand and just watching Mother Nature. My life is enriched for that day just by going out and doing it. So I'm always looking for an excuse to get out of the office.
Well, it sounds like a great excuse to get out of the office. Well, as we go along here, we hope that we get to have you on the show again. As we talked about prior to starting the recording here, if you could just let our listeners know how did last year go for you, and what takeaways did you have from last year?
Oh, you mean this most recent?
Correct.
A few weeks ago.
The
yes.
2016 or 2016/17 season.
Well, I had a good season. It started slow. Even though I'm adapted to a southern climate, lived here all my life, and even hotter being in South Texas, I still I just don't really start getting the itch until we start getting a few frosts on the ground. So if mosquitoes are still out, I'm typically not as excited about going. So I got going a little bit late, and I got to visit a friend, a buddy that we work together, and he's managing a property, and got to harvest a really nice mature buck, really nice 5-year-old buck, beautiful 8-pointer. And so that was a Christmas gift to myself, being on his property. And
nice.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And after that, we eat a lot of venison, Jason. That's the fish and deer is what we consume 9 out of 10 meals at my house. So I went on my doe killing spree then, and was able to get 4 does in January to get the freezer full and to keep us going until this coming October 17. So had a lot of good experiences, had a lot of close calls, had some bow hunting opportunities I wasn't able to capitalize on because it got the deer, like we were talking about earlier. If the deer had moved through 2 minutes earlier, it would have been a success, but she didn't cooperate. Got to see was lucky enough to hunt on a lot of properties that have an older age buck structure, so got to see some 6-year-old bucks and just how magnificent they look. Just when we work with people on aging deer on the hoof, trying to cultivate that skill, when you see in the rut or pre-rut or post-rut, this fully mature 6.5-year-old deer, it is something special. And you just never forget how different they look than other bucks. And so I got to see several of those this year. That was really nice. But I guess that's kind of it, Jason. But really, my only regret this year was bow hunting. I wasn't able to bow hunt enough, and I wasn't able to get a deer with my bow. And that is what is most special to me. That's when I'm most fulfilled, is when I'm able to harvest a deer with my bow, but I just kind of ran out of time and had to resort to the rifle. But I guess that's it.
I can certainly understand that. I this year, for the first time, had a gun in my hand and went out on I think it was this opening Sunday evening of the Wisconsin deer season, and had a deer that I had been after with my bow stand up at 63 yards. I ranged him at, and I had my gun in my hand after I ranged him, and then I just set it down and hoped and prayed that he didn't walk out onto the neighbor's cornfield before legal shooting light expired, and he didn't.
All right.
So, but as luck would have it, that deer ended up getting shot sometime in late December by one of the neighbors. So, and it was great for him. He was a great deer, and I'm glad someone was able to enjoy, chasing him as much as I was enjoying chasing him. Because when you work together, our neighborhood does, it's fun when anyone succeeds because it's a team effort to get him there. And it's just fun to watch the people get to enjoy the fruits of their labor, so to speak.
Absolutely. You're happy for them, and next year they'll be happy for you when it happens for you. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Well, if I could, I'd just like to answer, or excuse me, I'd like to ask you one of our listener-submitted questions, and that was with respect to what deer do when they transition in, early September, late August, when they're losing their velvet. It said, Bronson, what can you tell me about how a deer makes the decision whether they stay in an area or whether they leave an area? So what could you tell us about, getting, you've gotten the trail camera pictures all year of this 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, whatever the case may be. There's no guarantee he's going to stay, is there?
Right. He's probably going to be, you got to think about that time of year, and, when they're in velvet, that means they're typically going to be in bachelor groups, or they're certainly more likely to be in bachelor groups. And what's pretty cool, at least to me, about that is it's all a function of testosterone. So when they're in velvet, you got to keep in mind that's when testosterone levels are very, very low. And then and this is a function of photo period. We've talked about this on some other podcasts. It's not the moon that triggers it. It's all what's called photo period. That's the ratio of daylight to darkness. And that triggers a signal in their brain. And they have all these different hormones, the cascading effects of these different hormones. And then it triggers testosterone production again. Testosterone production starts to rise. And when testosterone production starts to rise, that's when antler hardening begins, and then the velvet is shed, and then now they're almost a different animal. It's like you got one animal half the year and another animal the other half of the year. So now they are reproductively viable. So whereas a doe is only going to be in heat, 24 hours or so, a buck is reproductively viable for months and months until he sheds his antlers, casts his antlers. So a lot of things happens right there for him behaviorally. So that's when those bachelor groups are going to set up. That's when that buck is going to go back to spending more time in his core area, an area that he's going to defend and certainly spend more time. And there's just really no way to know when you get him on camera. Let's just say it's in July or August, if he's going to be the one to hang out there or not. But I don't think that buck is going to completely move, 8 miles away. And deer individuals, and when I say they're not going to do it, there'll be one or two that do to break the rule. But on average, you're looking at a summer home range, and these bucks have bachelor groups, so they're all these home ranges may overlap a little bit, and they're spending time together, they're tolerating each other's presence, and then when the testosterone goes up and then they go into hard antler, they kind of now have a buffer. They move to their individual area where they're going to spend more of their time.
Okay.
That was a long-winded answer, but I hope somewhere in there was the answer your listener was looking for.
Yeah, and I think probably the thought that they had, and I guess I'm speaking for them, or actually I'll speak for myself, is there is no way that you can guarantee that deer is going to stay around. However, is it realistic to think that deer will be relatively close? In other words, he could easily show back up in the rut, correct? Yes, yeah.
I think you can assume that. Yeah.
Okay. So it's not that they're going to, be 6 country miles away. It sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, it's based on the photoperiodism, right? And then testosterone. And it seems like everything in the whitetails world, especially when we're talking about bucks, is testosterone. A lot of what they do is testosterone driven. Is that correct? Would that be
that is, yes.
Okay.
That is correct. Yeah. That is the motivating hormone for 4 to 5 months of the year there. Yeah, that is steering what they do. That's making them male. That's making them a buck that time of year. That's giving them the headgear, causing that structure to harden and form a weapon and form a signal. And until they cast their antlers, their goal from that point on is breeding. And so they're working on their territoriality, their social hierarchy with other bucks, determining the pecking order for when breeding opportunities avail themselves, that they'll know who's going to be the dominant buck to breed the estrus doe. So yeah, it's all testosterone driven, and their stomach plays a part in that too, right? They're going to be trying to fill their belly every now and again as well, but it's mainly breeding.
Okay. In areas where you see a high hunter density, like say a Michigan, Wisconsin, Pickett, I guess, New York, how out of whack, so to speak, for lack of a better way of describing it, does a deer's probability to do what they naturally would do, how out of whack does it get? If that makes sense? In other words, how much can hunter density, hunter pressure, mess up what they naturally would do?
I think where you would probably see that the most would be manifested in a couple ways. So you got to make a distinction here between hunter density versus just human density, so that there would be two different types of reinforcements there. If it's hunter density, meaning traffic in the woods, gunshots, deer dying, then you're going to immediately see changes in behavior. Probably more nocturnal activity, probably not near as much daytime activity or the distance that they travel. Research has shown that it can take anywhere from just a few days to where deer will start responding to human presence. They'll start changing their movement patterns and the times that they move. The other manifestation of that, Jason, is, and this isn't as prevalent now, but it really used to be 20 plus years ago, is when sex ratios get way out of whack. We had a pretty big impact on when the fawning season was. So when sex ratios get out of whack and you end up during the rut or soon thereafter where you've got 4 or 5 does per buck or more does per buck, you'll start seeing those does missing an estrus cycle, or not being conception not taking place during that first estrus cycle. So you'll see a more protracted, rut. They'll have to come into estrus the second time or possibly the third time. And that's not advantageous for a doe or for a fawn, especially where you live, Jason, is Mother Nature has that timed pretty well of when that fawn needs to hit the ground. So it stands the greatest chance to live. And so we see that a lot with how we can mess up the rut, but we do it by over-harvesting bucks or under-harvesting does, and the sex ratio gets out of whack. So I guess biologically that would be one of the biggest impacts, and then behaviorally, it's just with so many people in the woods, they probably change their movement patterns more. If you contrast that, why I said in more of a suburban-urban environment, so you can still see deer all the time. They may not have the negative reinforcement, so they're in people's backyards, they're walking up to the bird feeder, and they're having a different interaction with a human being than they are with a hunter in the woods. So in the urban context, you may not see this changes of behavior because, they're not being impacted the same way.
So you wouldn't expect, Bronson, to see them affected by that intrusion, if you will, as much in an urban setting as you would in, rural Iowa or Kansas or, pick the state. They're going to react differently. They're going to have a different personality. Is that fair to say?
Well, everything's based on what we kind of call a learned response.
Okay.
They have their instinct and their perceptions that Mother Nature has programmed them with, and when they start getting negative reinforcements, and like in a hunting environment where a deer was shot right beside them, and there's the smell of human being in the air, or they see the hunter or something like that, they start making these associations, and they start learning to modify behavior. But if you never have, like in that urban or suburban setting, having these negative reinforcements, now it would happen. So if you had some woodlot in a suburban environment, and then that particular group of deer, they start having negative interactions and deer start dying, they're going to start reacting, and they'll start learning and adapting. But I agree with your general statement, though. They're just going to behave differently in that hunted versus non-hunted environment.
Okay. How, and I'm sorry for interrupting you there, but how is it that they know the difference between danger and just cohabitating, if you will, in the same general space as a human being does? And I can give you an example of that, and maybe the answer will be completely different than what I think it is. But if I could, let me give you an example.
Okay.
2 years ago, I killed a 160-inch buck, and the farm that I hunted, the landowner retired, and he just wanted to enjoy it, and he just said, "Geez, I want to walk around." And I'm like, "Go for it, What am I going to say? No, go for it." He's always treated me well. He was my, fourth grade Sunday school teacher. He's now retired, and he still lets me come and hunt all the time, and that's great. And I'm the only one that does, and that's wonderful. But he goes for a walk in the woods every day, and not in the summer, but come November 1st, you can pretty much guarantee yourself he's going to be going for a walk. If my truck isn't parked there and he can't see it, he'll be walking through the timber on the old logging roads, of course. And this deer that I eventually killed, I had a trail camera picture of the landowner walking by. And 6 minutes later is this 160-inch buck standing there watching the direction that the landowner had walked. It almost as though he was standing there watching him walk away. And I'm wondering, is there any, and this I guess is getting a little specific to just my story, and maybe it can be applied to other folks that are listening, because certainly we have plenty of listeners in areas that are have a high hunter density and are relatively urban areas. But is there a way that they can tell the difference?
That's a great question. That's a great question, and one I really don't have a conclusive answer for, other than to say I would throw out a few possibilities. Number one, with the deer, as with all animals, they're individuals. And so we always, as biologists, we say on the average, or usually, or typically, the population behaves this way. But on the fringe, there's always some deer that do odd things. So maybe he's an outlier in his behavior. Maybe sensory-wise, if that buck had been on that property year after year after year, maybe that buck really could identify, your landowner there. Maybe you didn't perceive him as a threat. What about the hunting pressure around you? Is it heavily hunted around you?
Oh, yeah. Let's call 600 acres could have 20 hunters in it. Now, I control 225 of that 600, and, there's another, let's call it 200, that's controlled by another 3 guys. Or 4 guys, and we're talking strictly bow hunting here, not the gun season. The gun season, you can't turn any direction without seeing orange. But it's a pretty highly hunted area, and I think one of the struggles as a hunter that I have, and especially in doing these podcasts and listening to to yourself and Grant Woods and Kip Adams, and all this factual data that you have that can be backed up by collar studies and all the things that you've done. To me, sometimes it feels it feels frustrating, because I'm like, well, that can't possibly pertain to me because there's all these hunters in the woods. And am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong at all. It's just, God, that's so. I guess the only way I could reconcile what you told me is, for some reason, that buck did not perceive that man or his scent trail as a threat.
Okay.
And I cannot begin to tell you why. The one thing I would make it akin to is, you're probably familiar with this, or certainly have heard of it before, but you might be working with some ag producers, and the ag producer is out on the tractor, and he's running whatever it is, the combine or the disc or whatever, and there's deer all around, and he can drive the tractor right up to the deer.
Right.
But in that same field, that same area, put them on an ATV, or put them in a different truck or something, and now those deer, and then the deer run. So somewhere those deer are identifying that sight, sound, or smell, as a threat. And maybe day after day, year after year, they see the tractor and they just do not perceive it as a threat. So there's usually some stimuli that they're either programmed to run from, or they learn to run from it. They learn to be fearful, and that's how they learn and respond.
Okay, so I think I'm on, in a general way of saying this, I guess, or to put a generalization to what you said. Whether it's the guy that owns the land that I hunt on, or anywhere, the deer possess the ability to know the difference between good and bad, to an extent.
To an extent. So let's create a situation.
Okay.
So let's say you're in a suburban environment,
mm-hmm.
and you've got a bird feeder, a deer feeder, whatever, or maybe it's your garden. And every single afternoon, you're on the patio, and it starts out as, man, there's a doe. Look at that doe, and that doe is really skittish. She's really fearful. She comes out and takes a bite, sees you, goes back in. Next day, she comes out again, takes a few bites, and a week later, now she's out there with her fawns, and then a buck's out there with her, and they're just wagging their tail, and nothing's going on. Now, the next week, you sit out there with a crossbow and start shooting them when they come out. They're gonna that would be a negative reinforcement event, to where that they're probably not going to keep coming out. They have seen something, they have identified either your sight or your smell or the sound of a bow or a crossbow or a rifle or whatever, and me being in this place right here is now dangerous, and so they modify their behavior. But until nothing negative happens to them in that context, they're probably just going to keep right on eating your garden.
Do what they do. Okay, so and that's where all the things that you've learned, you yourself have learned, and any of us have learned about hunting. That's where they come into play. The great unknown, I guess, or the real message that I'm understanding now, loud and clear, is it's different, and it's different to the extent it's different with different situations, which may sound, ridiculous, but I think that's probably the best way that I could think of saying it. It just, every situation is different. However, the common thread between all of it is if they can associate it with danger, it's something that they're going to avoid.
That's exactly right. So we don't think they have the cognitive ability to rationalize like we do. We're not going to develop a process. Think of, with them, it's more stimulus response. I'm in this situation right now. Something really good or something really bad happened, and they're going to remember that going back to that particular place.
Okay. So it's realistic then to think that even though this landowner goes for a walk at 8-10 10 to 8:50 every morning that I'm not there, it's realistic to believe I guess it's realistic to come to the conclusion that walking across that open field at 5 a.m. is going to be a completely different scenario in their head. They're going to react completely different to that. So I guess what I'm saying is that they're not, just because he's walking through there all the time doesn't make them used to people. Is that accurate?
I think that would be accurate, yeah. I tried to think of an example, and I remembered, gosh, I wish I could remember the exact name of it, but for anybody that's interested in this type of question and has a Netflix account, there was this documentary I saw one time, and it was with a mule deer population, and I'm going to be really fuzzy on the details here because it was a couple years ago, but I was really fascinated. It was this fella, and he had a cabin. He was more of a naturalist and just loved observation. And there was this mule deer herd, of course, that migrates and, moves from this mountaintop to that mountaintop and things like that. And for whatever reason, and it took seasons and years, but he got to where that herd of mule deer accepted him. I mean, to going up and touching them, to bucks even coming up within a few feet of him. Now, when the hunting season rolled around, if they were still there, those deer were completely tuned in to when another human being with an orange vest on came over the mountaintop, they ran. They behaved like deer do with hunters. But for him, and it took a long time for this to happen, they did not associate any danger with him. So there was never a negative reinforcement with either the way he looked, the way he smelled, but over time they deemed him not to be a threat to their safety. And these are completely free-ranging wild deer.
Interesting. Okay.
But I was just contrasting right there for you, Jason, that in that same space and time, in that same range, one human being they ran from, one human being they're standing beside. So they have some type of ability to discriminate, the situation.
Right. It's amazing we can ever get close enough to kill them.
Yeah. Yeah, it is for me.
Well, I know I kind of got off on my own selfish story there. And there's, hundreds and hundreds of things that we could talk about. But the one, like I said, the one listener submitted question was with respect to what they're likely to do once the velvet comes off. And what it sounds like we know is that, they very well could move, but there's no precursor that's going to say, oh, no, that deer's definitely staying.
Right, unless he stayed last year.
Okay, so what if he stayed last year?
More than likely, he's going to be in that general area this year.
Okay, and when you say general area, does that general area change based on what part of the country we're in, or is a general area, and maybe I'm getting too specific, is a general area anywhere in the world?
It all comes down to a function of resources. So generally, and I got to throw the caveat here in too, deer, again, are individuals, and so of all the 3.5-year-old bucks, some will have really small home ranges and some really large home ranges, even in the same area with the same habitat quality.
Sure.
But on the average, this holds that if a deer has buck or doe, if they have all the resources at their fingertips, it is advantageous for them not to be moving as much. Don't risk moving and going somewhere longer distances and risk your survival in any way. So what happens generally is year after year, their core area for that season, so either for fall or for winter, it's going to be roughly in the same area and roughly the same size. So when you look at those data points on a map of where the buck was this year and where he was last year, yep, there's going to be some exceptions, and yeah, it shifted over here a little bit, and hey, he spent more time this fall further over here because, hey, the acorn crop was better. And the year before there wasn't as good of an acorn crop, so it shifted a little bit over here where he could take advantage of some agriculture or something like that. But generally they're kind of fixed in that general area, and then where they spend the most of their time is where they feel the most secure and where they can get the most food at the cheapest cost. And what I mean by the cheapest cost is where I don't have to move as much.
Okay. Risk
so
reward.
We try to think of risk reward. That's exactly right. That's the fancy term for that is called optimal foraging theory, and it is basically for a deer or for any wild animal, how do I acquire the most resources with the least amount of risk from predation and expenditure of my own resources? So you're looking at a daily energy budget. If I can spend 500 calories moving, but I can gain, I'm making these numbers up, but if I can spend 500 calories and make 2,000 and not have really any risk by moving a long way, they're going to take that versus I got to spend 1,500 calories to make 2,000 calories, And then when you get in some of these situations late in the winter, they have to spend more energy than they're making energy, and that's when they start losing weight.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that a buck, and probably deer as a general rule, their stomach, for the most part, up until November, fill in the blank, their stomach is going to dictate where they live, how much they move, etc. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Okay.
That's fair to say.
So in what pops back into my mind, and again, I'm being selfish here, but as long as I've got you and Todd's not here to eat up part of the conversation, I'll just abuse the privilege of talking to you. I shot a deer last year and wounded the deer, didn't find the deer, knew that I did not make a fatal shot because it was videoed, got trail camera footage of the deer in December. He's very identifiable because he had very tall brow tines and, just a basic 8-pointer, but had some neat features, including those long brow tines. Move ahead the next year. I kept, looking for him. Never got him on trail camera. And then one day in October, late October, there's this big brow tine 8-pointer working a scrape on the western edge of my property. And my friend, and he'll listen to this, once I posted it on Facebook, I think it was, I posted the picture on our White Knuckle page because nobody knows where it's coming from, and it's safe to do that, and it's not going to cause a whole bunch of people to run over to where I hunt. He said, hey, I've got a ton of pictures of that deer at my place. And now there's a 40 acres that separates the two of us. And it just made me wonder, why did he all of a sudden, maybe because I shot him the year before, but what made him, decide to take up refuge 40 acres over, and then when it came time to, start establishing his breeding dominance or whatever it is you'd refer to it in terms of a scientific term, he then all of a sudden appeared. So it would confirm what you said earlier. They're going to be in the area. They may not be exactly living there and visible September 1st through October 21st. But they'll be, relatively speaking, in the area, and there's a good chance to believe that you'll run into them at some point in the rut.
Yeah, absolutely. And to complement that, you got to think about seasonal food resources. So, I don't know where you hunt, the layout of the land and all that, but just think about, you've got spring foods, you've got summer foods, and you've got fall foods. And so the abundance and quality of that is changing, by week and month by month. And so during those summer months, Your buck, the long brow tine 8-point, yeah, he may have been with a bachelor group that offered better summertime food, and that's where he spent his time. And then when he gets, like we spoke about earlier, now, okay, testosterone levels are rising, start shedding that velvet.
Sure.
Now he's going into territoriality. Now he's got to start setting up those signposts, and he's getting into breeding mode, and then his home range either expands a little bit or shifts, based on experience.
I keep coming back in my mind to the food. Food. Is there something that I could have done to keep him there?
Well, there's something you could have tried, and whether it would have worked or not. Do you have warm season or summer food plots or agriculture?
Yeah, the area that I hunt, and this will lead into my next question because we're going to run out of time here, but the area that I hunt is largely agricultural. There may be the biggest tract of timber, a huge tract of timber would be considered 100 acres, and 100 acres maybe of marsh. In grassy areas, a lot of canary reed grass, and I know that's no good for deer to live in, but that just happens to be what grows prolifically in my area. But yeah, there's just a ton of agriculture, so that's what I am in my mind. I'm wondering, is there something I could have done with habitat? Is there something I could have done or that I should do to beat my neighbors? And not that I want all the deer to myself. That's not it. I always walk out there feeling like I've got an uphill battle because of all the pressure in my area. And as much as I want to plan a hunt based on all the information that you've given me that I learned on the last podcast you did, a lot of it still could be dictated by pressure. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go out there, I guess. But
what was the when you said you have agriculture though on the property you hunt? What kind of agriculture?
So
what crops?
The north end of the timber would have been corn. The east end of the timber was beans. The west end of the timber was beans. In between us, there was beans and corn. Corn, beans. Mostly corn, some beans. I wouldn't say that there was any great difference.
Yeah, well, it's hard to beat that.
Yeah, so
food.
So as I said earlier, I've been a little bit selfish here today, and I hope you don't mind. But I was just thinking, and I'm wondering if you'd be up for this, if you and I and Todd exchange, or at least Todd and I could exchange an aerial map of our hunting areas. We don't need to necessarily share them publicly. You could look at them and maybe, because Todd's terrain is vastly different than what I'm hunting. Much bigger tracts of timber, and we could look at that possibly and dissect from a biologist's standpoint how you would see those deer acting differently in very different types of terrain. Would that be something that would be of value?
Sure, I'd be happy to give it a shot. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, as I said, we're running out of time. Do us a favor. Tell us where we could go if we wanted to do some research in our own time and look at some of the studies. Maybe do you have some studies that are published? And where could we go? And I understand that you're also starting a podcast. So if you just to share with us where we could go to find information about you and where also we can get your podcast. All
right. Jason, I'm going to try to do this quickly, but this is going to be another one of my long-winded rants here.
That's okay.
But one-stop shop. You can just Google it, MSU, that for Mississippi State University, msudeerlab.com. And on there we've got all sorts of information, general information about biology, ecology, and management. We have a publications tab. You can scroll through there, and both our popular articles that we've published, our extension publications, our landowner publications, as well as our scientific articles. If you want to read something to put you to sleep, you can read our scientific articles. But they are all there, and so you can get a kind of some insight into the stuff we're working on. Now, to complement that, where we really keep things up to date, we try to always post once a week, is our MSU Deer Lab Facebook page. So if you just like us, like the Facebook page, every post you'll get into your feed on your Facebook account, and whenever something new comes up, it might be a story, it might be talking about a buck that's harvested, it might be a disease, it might just be anything that occurred during the week that we think is worthwhile for posting. We put that up there, and we also post there when we're doing events. So if we have seminars or workshops that are coming up, we have a calendar there posting that. And we're also, that's going to be the landing spot or one of them, for our podcast. So we have started recording a few podcasts that are all going to be deer management and deer biology driven. So every episode we're going to take various topics, like for example, what's going on with EHD, with blue tongue or disease, chronic wasting disease. Let's talk about antler growth. Let's talk about the rut and how it works. It goes on and on and on. So we'll just have a lot of biology and management-oriented podcasts. And, Jason, if I could make one more plug, we're at the end of deer season now everywhere, but I'd love for your listeners to think about incorporating this next year. One of the most exciting things we did this past 2 years, we launched it 2 years ago, but really got it more perfected. We still have more work to do, but have it more perfected, is we have an app for both your iPhone and Android, and it's called Deer Hunt. One word, DEERHUNT, Deer Hunt. And what that does is it allows you to record all of your observation data. And so every time you hunt, it can take your spatial location. You can create all of your stand locations. Whether you hunt by yourself or you hunt with a club or a group of people, you can keep your data private or you can share it. But the bottom line is, our motto is, when we work with people and they say, man, last year was this or last year was that, we say, well, do you have some data? Do we have some numbers to see some trends? What's going on with your population? And nobody, or rarely do people, keep observation data. And what this does is it is something that you can easily do on your phone. You start a hunt, you pick a stand, you start a hunt, and all you simply do is record the number and composition of deer you see. How many does, how many bucks. If you're able to age the buck as young or middle-aged or mature, you record that. And as you accumulate, Jason, these data over time, you can even look at your report spatially. So you can ask your data questions like, where are we seeing the most deer? Where are we seeing the most deer in the morning? Where are we seeing the most deer in the afternoon? What stands are we seeing more mature bucks? What stands do we see more deer? So within a year, you can start getting data about learning where deer are moving, where they're being seen more often, and then you also have data over time. Because you are recording the amount of hours you are hunting each time, you know at the end of the season that we hunted X amount of hundreds or thousands of hours and we saw this many deer. And from year to year, you can now scientifically, you, yourself, and your club, scientifically have a way to gauge what the deer population is doing. You can even record stuff like fawn recruitment. Is reproduction up or is reproduction down? You can look at your age structure, everything. You can, more or less, to be a biologist, we've put on this app for you to point and click and help analyze your data. So we are really excited about that. We just want more people to incorporate it and start getting some feedback from people on how they like it. But even a newer and improved version will be ready. We're going to add some more functions to it this year, and that's the type of thing. The beauty of being on our Facebook page is when we launch that, we'll post it and say you can download the new version and you can take it for a test drive and see if you like it. We even have a food plot app. Unfortunately, that's just for iPhones. We have a deer aging app and a deer food plot app where you can actually use our food plot app to map out the acreage. And once you get the acreage of your plot, you can select whether you want cool season options or warm season options, and it gives you the planting rates, planting dates, and all that stuff for different food plots. So we're really, with the MSU Deer Lab, we're trying to embrace technology, and we're trying to develop new ways to get, the most amount of management information out to hunters, and so how they can use it. And this type of stuff will also be the topic on our podcast, Deer University, when we get it going here in the next few weeks.
Okay. Well, I'll add
that.
That's great. I will put all of those things in the show notes. So any of you who are listening to this that want to look up Bronson and where you can find some of his information, it'll all be in the show notes for this particular show. So, Bronson, thank you for taking the time. I've got 100 questions bouncing around in my head, and I know that we've just scratched the surface. And I know after Todd hears this, he's going to be jealous that I got to ask all the questions, because if there's one thing that Todd loves to do, it's get in a chess match with deer, and loves to test his hypothesis on someone like you who studies deer on a I guess if you like Todd said, a molecular a molecular level. And so if we could, we'd love to have you back sometime, and we'll get down to some tactics and whether you think those tactics would work, and we'll look over those properties and do stuff like that.
Would love to.
All right.
Would love to. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, you just let me know when, and I'm available.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and have a good rest of your day, all right?
Okay. Thanks a bunch, Jason.
Well, there you have it, my interview with Bronson Strickland. It was definitely a fun one to do, and definitely one I won't forget in a long time. It was neat in the respect that I got to sort of relive last year's deer season, and, I think for all of us, we all sit and wonder, well, really what could I have done different? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And for me, it was just an opportunity to get to sit with somebody, or rather talk with someone that really had some science behind, possibly why what happened. And what I found out is that as much as we know about science, as much as we know about deer, they're still going to do what they're going to do on a given day. And a lot of different variables can come into that equation. So like you said, you got to be there to kill them. And that is not something we haven't all heard 100 times. So I hope you could take something away from this conversation and maybe apply it to the season that you had. As we always ask, please leave your comments regarding our podcast on our Facebook page. Also, if you could, please do a review for us on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever the case may be, wherever you're listening to this podcast. We would sincerely appreciate you doing a review. A review is how we get better at what it is that we're trying to do and what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and that's bring a quality show to our listeners, and certainly one that educates our listeners. So with that, I just want to remind you to go ahead and go to iTunes and subscribe to the show under the podcast section, and you'll get it every week. If you have an Android phone, go ahead to the Stitcher app and do the same thing, and you will also receive it every week. And thanks again for listening to our show. We sincerely appreciate it. I'm going to leave you with one thought for the week. And that thought comes from Proverbs 17, verse 17. And it says, "A friend loves a friend at all times, and a brother is born from a time of adversity." Think about that for a little bit. Have a great rest of your day, and go out there and be awesome.